we launched this product that aimed to do Bitcoin-backed lending. The idea of Bitcoin-backed lending is that if you have some Bitcoin but you don't want to sell it, you will pledge your Bitcoin as collateral to an institution, and they will give you $1 or euro. 3 months later, or 6 months later, or a year later, you can give back the fiat plus interest, and you get back your collateral, your Bitcoin. Interestingly, for me, the way I think about it, it's more risky for the bank, for the point of view of the bank, because as a bank, you get this collateral. It's the most pristine collateral you can have. Why? Because 24/7, you can liquidate it. You're sure if you have the key for it, you have access to it, you can move it, you can sell it. I think a lot of banks will join the Bitcoin journey, and I'm looking forward to see this massive amount of new bank institutions that are going to offer buy, sell Bitcoin services, borrow against your Bitcoin. Hopefully also be plugged to the Lightning Network. This might take a bit longer, but in my mind, this year is a year where bank joined the party.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show, I would really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button, which is the easiest way you could show your support for the show and help it grow, as well as making sure you don't miss out any of the future episodes. And also, I'm proud to announce that my newly launched Become Unruggable Bitcoin Self-Custody Mentorship Program is now live. So if you've been looking for a Bitcoin mentor to help you get your Bitcoin into self-custody, I'm now available to work with you one-on-one. Check out the show notes down below for all the different contact details, email, X, Noster, whatever you prefer. And also a big shout out to StampSeed for sponsoring the show. Check out stampseed.com for more information. And now let's get the episode underway. Enjoy. Welcome to Your Bitcoin Story with your host, Gigi. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Nicolas Burtey, the CEO and founder of Galoi, a company on a mission to bring banking into the Bitcoin age. Nicolas is a true pioneer in the Bitcoin space. He's been known for building the Bitcoin Beach wallet, now known as Blink Wallet, which helped drive real-world adoption of Bitcoin in El Zonte, El Salvador. But Nicolas and his team at Galoi aren't stopping there. They've just launched Lana, the Bitcoin loans platform, empowering banks to offer Bitcoin-backed loans and further bridging the gap between traditional finance and the Bitcoin economy. In this episode, we'll dive into Nicolas's Bitcoin journey, the groundbreaking work at Galoi he is doing, and how Bitcoin continues to reshape the world of banking. Nicolas, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I've heard a lot about the Bitcoin Beach wallet, which I mentioned, known as the Blink wallet. So it's a real pleasure having the man behind the idea and the man on the ground in El Salvador. I'm really curious to hear how things are there now, how they were before. But before we get into all those things, why don't you take us back to how did you first discover Bitcoin and how did your journey start?
So I am still an entrepreneur, but in 2012, I founded my first startup in the VR space. And when you do VR, virtual reality, you have to use a lot of GPUs. Something interesting came up in 2017. The price of GPU suddenly skyrocketed. And that's not something that is very standard because GPU is a fairly mature industry, and price of GPU, like every year you have a new GPU coming to the market. Maybe the high-end gaming device will cost like $1,000. The same device a year later will be at $700, and then you have a new version that is being released by NVIDIA, and it costs $1,000 again, but it's like twice as fast, and rinse and repeat. But in 2017, instead of GPU going from like 1,000 to 700, GPU price skyrocketed, maybe from 1,000 to 1,500 or $2,000. And as I was in this virtual reality industry, like we had in the company many GPUs, right? Because we were developing on GPUs. And it was weird that we start reading on blog related to VR that, hey, this is why price of GPU are going higher. It's because you have those miner that like buy all the supply to buy At the time, Bitcoin was already using ASIC, so it was GPU was used for mining Ethereum. And so you will see article on blog post for VR that talk about mining and Ethereum. And I was like, that makes no sense. Like, how could an industry as mature as GPU mining, sorry, could be disrupted by miner? Like, what the fuck is a miner? Like, I have to understand it, right? Because for me, it didn't make sense. And this was really the beginning of my journey into, like, I would call it crypto. My background is not finance. It's more mathematics and computer science. And so in 2017, what I saw is that, I mean, on the Bitcoin side, there was maybe the block size war. And it seems like, okay, like the Ethereum community was more friendly to developers that maybe didn't know much about finance, but it was certainly a welcoming industry. And so I followed this rabbit hole. But it's also when you embark into this Bitcoin journey, you want to know everything about it. So this is when I start learning about finance and economics. And about 2 years later, I really understood that Bitcoin is really unique and is different from any other crypto asset out there. So this is where I decided that I have to work on Bitcoin. And so this is when I founded Galoi. And this was really the beginning of my journey to be like Bitcoin focused. When I found Galoi, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, except I wanted to work on Bitcoin. And what I saw is the Lightning Network was an area where, everything need to be done. Like the protocol was just released, we started to see some implementation from different company, but there was like no wallet really, or very few wallets. And so I was like, if I want to be an entrepreneur, maybe this is a right or like a great area to focus my attention. So I started to develop Lightning Wallet. Initially, I developed a self-custodial wallet. I quickly saw that the economic would be challenging. I was thinking maybe a custodial wallet could be a good area to try. I was living in California at the time, but I knew that certainly payment for Bitcoin would not start from the US, because in the US overall payment is working well. People have bank account. Everybody have a credit card. Every merchant accept credit card or debit card.
Venmo, there's so many options, right?
Venmo, PayPal. If people are unbanked in the United States, it's by choice. It's not because there is too much hurdle to open a bank account. Pretty much unlike El Salvador, which is like much harder to open a bank account here. But anyway, so I understood that the US won't be the place for innovation in 2019, right? For payment using Bitcoin. So I was looking for a place where, is there a community somewhere that may benefit from having a Lightning wallet? And this is when I heard about this new project in El Salvador called Bitcoin Beach. For me, it was maybe a good area to experiment. And so I reached out to the founder of this project, Mike Peterson, and he said, yeah, sure, like why not? And this is how basically the journey of the Bitcoin Beach wallet got started 5 years ago. Fast forward, last year, we decided to divest from the Blink wallet. Bitcoin Beach has been renamed from Blink, because at the end of the day, the company that I want to build, I want to be more focused on the software side of things. And building software is what I think I know. And when you have to build a bank, it's a bit different. You have a lot of regulatory things you need to focus on. You need to have like chief compliance officer, this type of thing. And I prefer to do software and not have to
work with
operate
back
a bank
office
myself. And so, so right now we basically focus on helping banks to adopt Bitcoin as opposed to being a bank ourselves. And I think now is the right time to do it, because like 5 years ago when I founded Galoi, there was no bank could really use Bitcoin. And it's not because they didn't want to, like some would have wanted to, and some did actually, but the regulatory environments make it very difficult for a bank to use Bitcoin. This has changed a couple of weeks ago typically one of the big elements in the US is a repeal of SAB 121, which prevented banks to use Bitcoin basically with some accounting hurdle. And now we see a world where bank will adopt Bitcoin fairly quickly. So now we're focused on, okay, let's develop the software for the bank, and financial institution in general, so that those financial institutions could use Bitcoin.
Amazing. It's incredible how far the journey has gone from you visiting the Bitcoin beach to building the wallet to building now essentially, so to say, the Bitcoin platform framework for banks to utilize around US and around the world. And did you expect it to come around so fast in just a mere 5 years? Or did you think like this is going to take a long time until the banks jump on? Or the back of your mind, you were like, these guys are going to come on anytime now and we got to build something for them?
On one hand, I was thinking, for instance, Lightning would be further along. When I started working on it, I think it will be a lot more prevalent today. And I think it has to do with the fact that maybe for payment, like stablecoin is a more easy, it's easier to use. You don't really need to think about the volatility, like you have something that is pegged to the dollar. So I was thinking that the Lightning Network will go very quickly, and it has grown quickly, I think. But I would have thought that by now there would be a lot more usage overall. On the other hand, I think the idea that Bitcoin is bought by central bank today, it's bought by nation state, would not have guessed, this will go so fast. I guess it will depend do you qualify Bitcoin as a store of value, or do you qualify Bitcoin as a medium of exchange or as money? And I will say that for Bitcoin, number of technology, it has gone much faster than I would have anticipated. But for Bitcoin as money, it's still somewhat behind what I would have thought.
True, but why can't it be both? Why can't it be a means of exchange as a payment gateway as well as a store of money? It's essentially it hits both of those things buckets perfectly. No.
Yes, I think so, and I hope so. I hope that Bitcoin can be used as money. For example, I think El Salvador is a very good proxy for thinking about this. El Salvador in 2021 have adopted Bitcoin as legal tender.
As legal tender.
And that was a surprise to me. I mean, of course, to some extent, we were the only Bitcoin company in the country when it was announced. And so for us, that was a very good opportunity. When Bitcoin was announced in El Salvador, it was not announced for its saving technology aspect. It was announced for its medium of exchange.
Merchant adoption.
And the idea was really to get people to accept Bitcoin payment. Interestingly, the law mandates that business have to accept Bitcoin. So every business had to accept Bitcoin in El Salvador between 2021 and up to a few weeks ago. That said, the government never enforced the laws. It's not like everybody was accepting Bitcoin. Actually, few business overall accepted Bitcoin. And there was like two tranches of businesses will accept Bitcoin. It's either the large international businesses or the very small merchants, the chandas. And why is that? It's because if you're a very small merchant, maybe you're part of the informal economy, and so like you just download the wallet on your phone and you blink and you start accepting payments, and that's it. And you don't overthink it. An international business, you basically typically work with the law, and so if the law said you have to do that, they do that because they have also the IT capacity, the capacity in general to like adopt this new technology if it is mandated. And so this is why in El Salvador you can go to McDonald's or Starbucks or Walmart, the equivalent of Costco, and just like pay with Bitcoin, which is awesome. And they have adopted it not because they necessarily understand Bitcoin or wants Bitcoin. It's because, okay, if the law mandates that we have to accept it, we're going to accept it. But something interesting happened a month ago is that El Salvador have reverted the law or changed the law. Not completely reverted, but amended it. And Bitcoin is no longer legal tender in El Salvador. Okay. Business are no longer obligated to accept Bitcoin. And
But you can pay in
many people will
Bitcoin
say,
if you want to.
yeah, it's like optional, right? It's like a business
Okay.
can accept Bitcoin if they wanted to. Prior to that, the law was saying that Bitcoin is mandatory in El Salvador, even though it was not enforced by the government. If you read the law, it says, yeah, you have to accept Bitcoin, right? In addition to the US dollar. So that's one aspect. And then you can contrast it with the fact that El Salvador is buying Bitcoin. It's probably the only country today that is publicly advertising
1 Bitcoin a day keeps
1 Bitcoin a
inflation
day.
away.
Keep the doctor away. Yeah, it's a good one. And you think, okay, but who is buying? I mean, the government is buying, and basically the new shift is that, okay, now the government of Salvador is buying, which is great for El Salvador, right? Because if the price of Bitcoin go up, the government have more financial capacity to invest in the infrastructure, and like that's good for the country. But it's really, okay, the government is in control, and like is keeping Bitcoin, is in its treasury, as opposed to previously it was everyday people should use Bitcoin, right? And you see the shift from like Bitcoin being maybe a medium of exchange for El Salvador to know Bitcoin being this like saving technology. And for me, I would have liked that Bitcoin stay, have still a focus on medium of exchange. Right? But and I guess it has to do with the IMF. I mean, there is a lot of probably the IMF is not super happy that country are adopting Bitcoin. So there was like certainly a lot of political influence behind the scene.
For sure.
That sounds quite obvious to anyone that pay attention here. But it's still for me a step away from using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, like compared to where El Salvador was before this law change.
For sure. I wanted to bring up a question. So, like, it was a 4-year, so to say, window from when Bukele announced Bitcoin as legal tender in the country until just a few weeks ago when the IMF law was approved and they had to basically scale back their Bitcoin, call it, endeavors with removing it as legal tender. But why do you think the government didn't do more to, I wouldn't say enforce, but like to get merchants to adopt it? Do you think that's like the government's fault or just the general people's interest of looking into Bitcoin, like the educational aspect of it that didn't kind of spread in these 4 years?
On one hand, I think maybe government should not necessarily be too much involved into money. I mean, you see a world where like if government were not meddling with money, maybe it would be a better world, right? So I don't know how good is it that El Salvador is enforcing the use of Bitcoin. At the same time, it's a very interesting experiment, right? And I'm super happy to have been part of this experiment and see how people, think about Bitcoin. And in 2021, if you were coming to El Salvador and you asked the local, like, oh, but what do you think about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin law? A lot of the local will respond, I mean, it's the money from Bukele. Like, no, do I want to use it? Like, it's like, I'm like, no, it's not the money. Bukele is not printing more Bitcoin. It's not how this works, right? And certainly it's a question about education. Should the government provide education for Bitcoin? I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it could be useful, but it might be even so better if it's maybe some non-government bodies that do the education, I think. So yeah, I don't know. Did you have another part in your question that?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question specifically on education, because maybe the government didn't kind of facilitate education for the merchants, but they did do something, if I'm not mistaken, with bringing Bitcoin into educational curriculum with teaching kids about Bitcoin. Is that true?
I think so. I'm not super up to date about what has been done in the school. I think there is a couple of programs. I don't know to what extent it's like wide scale or not. Probably MIPA Bitcoin is like doing this, but I'm not exactly sure. I think there is some initiative. I mean, generally, if you think about it, the way money works with the US dollar or the euro, it's a lot about. I mean, it's fractional ways of banking, right? But if people were to understand that
It's
the
a
money,
big secret how money works.
yeah, and generally, I think governments have an incentive to not necessarily have the population know, but how money works, right? Because if people know that the money in the bank, is only insured up to a certain amount, and that the money is really the property of the bank, more so your property, and that the money is not here because basically if 5 or 10 people were to withdraw it, the bank would go under. The system will collapse overnight, right, in the current system. So generally, governments are not educating population, I think, about money, and it might be on purpose, I think. And so I think it's good to have El Salvador government doing education about money, I think, right, which is very
For sure.
unique. Yeah, but I also think that if private entity does education, it might even be better.
Imagine this, the market's crashing, exchanges are freezing withdrawals, but you're cool as a cucumber because you're unruggable. With my Become Unruggable mentoring service, you'll get one-on-one support with me to safely move your Bitcoin into self-custody. I'll guide you step by step at your own pace, as well as making sure you have a rock-solid recovery plan in place. Take control, stay sovereign. Get in touch via the link in the show notes below, and let's make you unruggable. And now, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, no, the reason I asked this was, and I brought it up was because, me in school or yourself, Nicholas, we never had how does money work? Where does money come from? Lesson, which to me is kind of crazy. We get taught so many useless things in school, but then when it comes to actually kind of the bloodline of living the money is never taught to you. It's kind of just this thing that is, here we use it for payments, but like don't ask too many questions. And to me, it was super nice that, even maybe if it wasn't the government institution, if it was like non-for-profits, but the fact that they're teaching young kids about Bitcoin and kind of planting the seed in their minds while they're young, I think that's super powerful for the future generations. And who knows what kind of, use cases and new developments they come up with. I think that's super nice.
Yeah, I agree.
So I wanted to now touch upon your latest launch, which I think just happened a few weeks ago with Lana, which I mentioned in the introduction. Can you give a little bit of kind of an overview, TLDR, to our listeners? What is the Lana platform that you launched and kind of what are you looking to achieve with it?
Yeah, so we launched this product that aimed to do Bitcoin-backed lending. The idea of Bitcoin-backed lending is that if you have some Bitcoin but you don't want to sell it, you will pledge your Bitcoin as collateral to an institution and they will give you $1, or your 3 months later, 6 months later, or a year later, you can give back the fiat plus interest and you get back your collateral, your Bitcoin. So this is what we have announced. We are developing this product in a way where, as we want to be the software company, not the bank, what we are doing is it's a white label services where it allows banks or financial institutions in general to say, okay, if I want to offer this product to my customer, I can work with Galoi and they will just plug their product basically to my core banking system and I can have a Bitcoin-backed lending product to my customer in a matter of weeks.
In a world where water spills, fires rage, and pets chew everything in sight, only one thing can save your Bitcoin seed phrase: StampSeed. Don't let a coffee accident turn your Bitcoin into Bitcoin gone. With StampSeed, your seed phrase is engraved in metal, safe from elements, toddlers, and your own clumsiness. Use promo code BTCStory at stampseed.com for 15% off, because in the end, metal always wins. And now, let's get back to the episode. Interesting. I think you are the first software company that's offering this product, right? There hasn't been, because Bitcoin loans is not something particularly new in the space for the last few years. We've had plenty of companies, some more positive, some more negative with losing a lot of stuff, but it was all focused on retail. It was B2C, it wasn't kind of like a product B2B for other institutions. Are you essentially the first company that's offering such a product?
Yes, we're definitely. I mean, there was B2B company before, and we can dive into the risk of this product, right? And what you want to look at if you want to get a loan with your Bitcoin. Definitively, even the companies that are now defunct, like the BlockFi of the world, if you are a business, you could get a loan from them, right? So they were working with B2B and B2C. The difference is that up to now, because also it's a nascent market, everybody who wanted to enter this market had to develop the software themselves, right? So you need a team of software engineer to think about, okay, how does a credit lifecycle work? How does a collateral work? So how should I think about the liquidation? Which custodian should I use? And all that. And so it's definitively a barrier to entry for a company to enter this market. That not only they need to think about all the regulatory burden, but they also need to think about, okay, who is competent as a software developer to build this type of product. And so now, by entering this market, we hope that we can enable many financial institutions to launch Bitcoin-backed lending product, which in turn could help to lower the interest rate. So currently, because there is very little actor in this industry, the interest rate is high, like about 10 to 15%, while the treasury, 3-month treasury bill is like 4%, meaning there is a spread of 10% or more on top of like the short-term treasury bill, which is crazy. Like, I mean, it's certainly a great arbitrage trade for any companies that are in this business. And our goal here is that by enabling financial institutions to enter this market, hopefully for Bitcoiners that want them to borrow and get them Bitcoin, they can have a much lower interest rate.
I see. And is this something that you've noticed, being focused on this, that banks were looking to offer this? Because just like a couple of years ago, like banks didn't want nothing to do with Bitcoin, but now like things have developed so fast, and especially on the regulatory basis, that there's more or less, on how Bitcoin is, to be handled and regulated. Do you see more and more banks this year and going forward that will be looking to offer this service?
Definitely. And I can give maybe an anecdote for El Salvador also. Some people say, okay, the adoption in El Salvador is limited for Bitcoin. And they will say, okay, for instance, the bank do not offer Bitcoin product. You can think about the large bank like Banco Agricola, Banco Cuscatlan, Banco Atlantida. There's a couple of, it's a small market, like there is only half a dozen banks here. But why do those banks not offer Bitcoin? If Bitcoin is like legal tender, like,
Yeah.
Do you have an idea of why?
Well, because they don't know how to. They don't have the technology. They don't have that know-do of how to do it. No, I would guess.
So that's one element, but that's not the big element. The big element is because
taking business away from the other business of lending.
That's maybe another element, but that's not the biggest one either. So if you're a bank in El Salvador, so El Salvador have the main currency is the US dollar. And so you can transfer dollar from one bank to another bank here. But the way you should be thinking about it is like you're level 2 on top of the US dollar in the United States. It's like a microcosm with like a couple of banks that can exchange dollar.
It's like the way those banks USD.
Yeah, exactly. It's really the same principle of like layers.
Yeah.
But the banks where do they put the dollar? The banks that are in El Salvador, they have a corresponding bank in New York, typically. And this is where their dollar is, parked, right?
Okay.
At the end of the day. And so if they don't get a corresponding bank in the US, basically they can't really move money around except locally in El Salvador.
Really?
And so every bank, need a corresponding bank, typically in New York, because the US dollar is the international currency in the world, right? So you need access to the US dollar. And especially so if your country is using the US dollar as the main currency. And so if the bank in New York, where, me as a bank in El Salvador, my money is in this bank in New York, this bank in New York tell me like, no, sorry, you can't touch,
the
Bitcoin,
money.
You can't touch cryptocurrency. It doesn't matter that Bitcoin is legal tender in El Salvador. Those banks will lose their corresponding bank relationship if they start using Bitcoin, probably, right? And so they're like, no, I won't risk my ability to send money abroad. Better be safe than sorry, right? Because otherwise I'm going out of business. And so when you start thinking about this, you realize how important the United States is for Bitcoin banking. And because now the regulation have changed in the US over the last months, and now it's really 180 degrees going from like anti-Bitcoin to like pro-Bitcoin. I think for the world in the United States, but also anywhere else, bank now will rush into using Bitcoin very quickly.
I see. I had no idea about this whole correspondence spider web with the US. I was just thinking, I knew El Salvador was using US dollars, but I thought it was kind of the cash was parked there. But yeah, that's interesting. I had no idea. I have another question since we're talking so much about banks. Something that's been kind of a hot topic lately was about like Bitcoin banks, like not banks adopting Bitcoin, but actual like Bitcoin banks being developed in the future. And there on X, there's plenty of people that are speculating that MicroStrategy, or as they're known now, Strategy, with their Bitcoin logo, they will likely launch a Bitcoin bank in the future. What's your kind of take? Do you see that coming in the near future, where like a new bank is opened, where it's just transacting, it's given services on a Bitcoin standard, or you think that's still a long, long way away?
It's probably a long way. For now, the only reasons you will want to borrow Bitcoin, in a Bitcoin denominated way, like, is if you're hedge fund and you want to short Bitcoin, and it's a very risky endeavor. Typically, if you're a hedge fund, you will need to post like some other collateral to do this trade. Let's say in a distant future where there is less volatility, if you have a lot of money in your treasury, like, sure, you would want to lend it and get interest on that. I think that's it's something that you can easily project, I think.
I see. Going back now to more focusing on El Salvador, and kind of, you mentioned, in 2021, most people, when you ask the locals, what do you think about Bitcoin, they're like, oh, no, this is Bukele money. Like, I don't want nothing to do with it. Have you noticed the change in the general, like, local population, like not the nomads, but like the locals? Are they more like looking at Bitcoin as a savings tool, or it's still kind of alien kind of technology, which they really don't want nothing to do with it? What's your personal experience with that?
I think the general awareness about Bitcoin in El Salvador for the local population is fairly low, but that say more and more people are being onboarded. There is different education program. There is some from Bitcoin Beach, there is some from Prima Bitcoin. There are others that are definitively educating the local population. That takes time, but as time goes, you go to Bitcoin meetup, or I organize a conference called Adopting Bitcoin every year in El Salvador, and we have had 4 sessions. The 5th session will be this year. And each year there is a bit more Salvadorian coming.
Nice.
And so it's definitely growing. But it's not like if you take a random person in the street, like in San Salvador, like probably they will not know a lot about Bitcoin. So the level of education for the population is still low. But bear in mind that still El Salvador is changing dramatically compared to the first time I came here 5 years ago, and now like it's a different country. The biggest difference is certainly on the security side. Today it's a country that is perfectly safe. It was not 5 years ago, and that's certainly the biggest difference. Now, if you ask a random person, like, okay, what is your pain in life? Like, they will say, okay, the economy is hard. Inflation is around like everywhere because of the money printed like a couple of years ago. I guess the economy is what is hard. Like probably most countries in the world, like, but here, it's like it is felt. And then if you think about, okay, but if most people have no ability to save just because they live paycheck to paycheck, like, of course, Bitcoin is not the first thing they will be willing to learn. Like, you first need to have an ability to save money before you see the benefits of Bitcoin.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, actually. Maybe that's the reason we're not seeing so much Bitcoin adoption around the world, because, as you said, like, most people are living paycheck to paycheck. They have no extra money to put on the side, let alone to be studying about the hardest money that the world has ever seen and storing it there. But I guess, with time, those things will change. But Nicolas, like we've talked a lot about the Bitcoin and banking, which is kind of your main aspect. On the wider spectrum of Bitcoin trends and how things are changing, what is kind of maybe another aspect of Bitcoin that's currently exciting to you? What's happening in the space at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tied to the Bitcoin blocking, but the Bitcoin back collateral system is, I guess, what we're focusing on. Maybe we can dive into that. I think this is a very exciting option that Bitcoiner will have in the future. And so if you think about this, there will be many services in the future. Some where like you pledge your collateral and this collateral is really hypothecated to other party, and it might be a very dangerous trade you might want to enter into. Some other where you will use maybe a multi-sig. The idea is that, let's say I have one Bitcoin, I want to borrow, let's say Bitcoin is at 80,000 something today, and I want to borrow maybe 50% from it, so 40K. If there is a services that allow me to have a multi-sig where I can see my collateral, I can see my collateral is not moving, I think this is a type of exciting opportunity that we have with Bitcoin that is not possible with other type of asset-backed lending. Typically, I don't know if you have gold or if you have a painting or something like, if you pledge your collateral, like you
can't
don't
see it.
necessarily get to see it. Like here with Bitcoin, we can certainly construct those advanced multi-sig. And I think that's something that's quite exciting because you can't do that with any other assets, right? You can't. So that's something very, very, it's one of the things we're working on, right, to allow financial institutions to use this different scripting tool to that will be for Bitcoiner. I think the Bitcoiner will want to favor those tools typically because the likelihood of the collateral being disappearing is much lower. That said, today in this industry, there is, as of now at least, there is an imbalance. There is more people that want to borrow against their Bitcoin, and there is not enough dollar in the system, which is why the interest rate is pretty high. As more industry player enter this market, the interest rate should go down. But today what we see is like a lot of the industry player, if you think about financial institutions, they don't really know what is a multi-sig or how to think about that. If the price go down, there is a margin call, like how do you move the collateral quickly? Many financial institutions today like say, okay, maybe a single sig is preferable. I'm more used to this type of environment.
Custodying the asset.
Yeah, sure. But I think one of the things that we want to educate financial institutions on is that, you have this new option. And maybe if you offer this option, the Bitcoiner will want to pay higher interest, right? So like you should consider this because maybe it makes your product more profitable.
I've got a question. It's a personal question. I've never, so to say, borrowed against my Bitcoin, but like just personal question. I think this is a great option to ask, and I'm sure some listeners would be interested in that as well. Let's say I take out a Bitcoin loan today at the rate of $85,000, and I take let's say like a 12-month loan to repay it, and in the next 2 months, like Bitcoin does a big dip of like 40-50%. Don't I risk the chance of getting liquidated and losing that Bitcoin, or how does the collateral aspect work? Or you can choose where the liquidation price is. How does that work practically?
So typically when you take a loan, you have collateral to
cover it.
Value ratio, right? So is it that you have one Bitcoin at 80K and you borrow 40K against it? What this means, if you do that, it means the price of Bitcoin can
50% pullback.
Can have a drawdown of 50%.
Okay.
Typically what will happen is that maybe at TK or like 55K, you will receive an email saying, hey, like dangerous territory here.
We're
like
close to stop loss.
Exactly. And in that case, the platform.
Nicolas, can I just stop you? I've lost the sound and I'm not sure if that's on my end or on mine. I can see everything's fine. Can you just double check your mic? Because it's just muted. Maybe in the sound sections again. I think you're back.
1, 2, 3,
yeah.
4.
You're back. Yeah, you're back.
Okay. I'm not sure what happened.
Me neither.
Okay,
sorry, cutting you halfway. So let's take it back to so it falls 50% down. So at 55,000, that's what I last heard, you would get essentially this notification that you're close to a margin call. So at that option you have.
Yeah. So in that case, typically you will want to add more collateral.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you send another Bitcoin here, it means now the price can go down to 20K maybe or 25K.
Okay.
But it's a risky endeavor because if you look at the life cycle, maybe the price go down for like 80%, right? And so if you put all your Bitcoin, you take a loan for everything, and you cannot top up your collateral, then you will get liquidity. Also, or you can also maybe repay the fiat part, right? Like to that will also typically be an option. So you have indeed the risk of liquidation. You have another risk, which is the counterparty you're working with go bankrupt, and maybe in the bankruptcy they take possession of the Bitcoin. So some financial institution will have the collateral in a separate vehicle that is bankruptcy remote. In that case, you have less risk because even if the entity go bankrupt, they can't take your collateral. But maybe for many retail products, it will be bundled in the same basket, and maybe your collateral is at risk, right? And so in that case, even though you have plenty of collateral and your margin is safe, you can also lose it. Which is why I think we need more financial institutions to offer a product like this, and probably the ones that have the best balance sheet and are the most trusted, will be favored. Or the ones that offer bankruptcy remote protection, I think will also be certainly good financial institution to work for. But it certainly, if some Bitcoiners want to consider it, that are listening to the pod, they should certainly consider that it's not risk-free.
Yeah. And don't go all in. Don't put your whole stack into a loan
Maybe
vehicle.
Put a small portion, if you want to buy a car. I think that's a useful instrument. But it's interestingly, for me, the way I think about it, it's more risky for the bank, for the point of view of the bank. Because as a bank, you get this collateral. It's the most pristine collateral you can have. Why? Because 24/7, you can liquidate it. You're sure if you have the key for it, you have access to it. You can move it. You can sell it.
And in the long term, it's going to grow. It's not like the bank needs to sell it tomorrow to cover its employee fees. They can hold it for a few years, and historically, it's going to be worth much, much more.
Yeah, but if you take a loan, if I'm a bank and I take a loan against, I give you a fiat for the Bitcoin you send me. Hopefully the bank doesn't do anything with the Bitcoin. It's just parked somewhere. It's a collateral, and it's they're not gambling with it. But so for you, yes, if you want to get a loan, this is what you want. Typically, you might want to use that is because probably the price of Bitcoin in 4 years or 8 years, will be higher, by some order of magnitude than it is today. And so this is why instead of selling your Bitcoin today, you can borrow against it and let the price go, right? And for people living in most places also, there is a taxable event to sell your Bitcoin if you have a capital gain. It's a good reason, by the way, to live in El Salvador and have Bitcoin as legal tender, even with the new law update. There is no capital gain on Bitcoin. So if you live in El Salvador, it's not a consideration. But if you live in the US, if you live in Europe, it will be a consideration. And if you have to pay 30% tax, maybe you should more borrow against it.
That's true.
And delay the time at which you will pay the tax. So it's another reason for why Bitcoiner might want to consider it.
That's true. And also, another part, I guess, is also kind of keep in mind where we are in the cycle. If we are peaking out at crazy all-time highs, and we've had a bull run for the past year and a half, maybe taking a 12-month loan on a big portion of your Bitcoin is not the smartest idea, right? Or it doesn't matter as long as your risk, as long as you're loaning out a small portion, 5, maybe 10% of your stack.
Yeah. The only thing that is more scarce than Bitcoin is time, right? And so if you need to buy something, buy a house, buy a car,
can't wait for years.
This is why you save for Bitcoin, is to eventually use it. And so
that's true.
Yeah, you want to be cautious and not necessarily put 100% and YOLOing, and this is where, of course, things might turn against you.
That's true. So I guess, Nicolas, another question I ask all my guests on the podcast is, what's one piece of advice you would give to individuals that are only starting their Bitcoin journeys right now, since kind of everything you've lived with, and kind of what's one piece of advice you would give to the younger Nicolas when he started his Bitcoin journey? What's that piece of advice you would share? Probably
DCA without cold storage. Probably don't start with borrowing against your Bitcoin. Wait until you have accumulated some. DCA would be my advice.
I like it. DCA is definitely the way forward. You definitely never want to put all your eggs straight in, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And And if you're relying on that money to live and get by, and tomorrow we have a 10-20% dip, you're definitely gonna sell a lot of loss, and in the end you're gonna be on the wrong side. I think that's fantastic advice. Just last question, Nicolas, essentially living in El Salvador and now launching the Lana platform. What's kind of your outlook for the rest of the year and going forward? Any exciting things lined up apart from, of course, rolling out further your latest product?
Yeah, and I think I give a hint already. I think a lot of banks will join the Bitcoin journey, and I'm looking forward to see this massive amount of new bank institutions that are going to offer buy, sell Bitcoin services, borrow against your Bitcoin. Hopefully also be plugged to the Lightning Network. This might take a bit longer, but in my mind, this year is a year where banks join the party.
Amazing. Well, the banks are certainly coming in. Nation states are coming in. Some are at the moment putting some things on pause, but maybe things will turn around. And actually, one last question that just popped into my mind. Since we're talking so much about El Salvador, what's happening with the volcano mining that the government was working? Is that project still under construction or is that operational? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know too much beyond the fact that I know there is a mining rig facility like somewhere in Berlin, El Salvador.
Yeah.
I don't have much more insight.
I see. Well, we'll maybe have another El Salvador. I mean, non-El Salvadorian that's on El Salvador to maybe share some more insights on that. But Nicolas, thank you so much for coming on. Where can we send our listeners to follow you and stay in touch with everything that Galoi is doing? What's the best place?
Yeah, thank you, Gigi, for the interview. People can find me on Twitter, Nicolas Burtey, or on Galoi on X.
Amazing. Well, Nicolas, all the best of luck with all the great developments you're doing. Best of luck with everything else. Hopefully, I'll be able to join you maybe later this year or perhaps the following year in El Salvador for adopting Bitcoin. I heard a lot of good things from fellow Bitcoiners. So it's definitely on my bucket list to do. So yeah, I'd love to see you in person, and all the best of luck. And until next time.
Hope to see you in person as well. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might benefit too. Your support keeps us going, and we appreciate it. See you in the next one.